I'm Amanda, 26, and I've spent my entire life working twice as hard for half the recognition. While my parents celebrated my brother Brandon's every move, I was the afterthought. The asterisk in our family story. But nothing made this clearer than when Brandon graduated college. My parents bought him a shiny new car with a big red bow. When I graduated with honors, they handed me an itemized bill for every time I'd stayed in my childhood bedroom. Before I tell you how I finally stood up for myself after years of being treated like a second-class family member, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt undervalued by the people who should love you most. Growing up, I always felt like I was auditioning for the role of beloved daughter, a part that had already been filled by my brother in the beloved son version. It wasn't something I could articulate as a child, just a persistent feeling that no matter what I did, it was never quite enough. My parents, Richard and Margaret Wilson, weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. Dad owned a small construction company that did well enough to keep us in a nice 4-bedroom house in a good school district. Mom worked part-time as an administrative assistant but mostly dedicated herself to managing our home and, particularly, Brandon's busy schedule. Brandon was 3 years younger than me, but you'd never know it from the way our family revolved around him. He was naturally athletic, charming in that effortless way some people just are. And he had my father's easy smile and my mother's dark hair. I took after my grandmother Eleanor, bookish, analytical, with auburn hair that never quite behaved the way I wanted. The favoritism wasn't something that happened overnight. It was built through thousands of small moments that accumulated like sediment, eventually forming a rock-solid reality I couldn't ignore. When Brandon joined the baseball team at 8, Dad spent thousands on equipment, private coaching, and traveling to tournaments. That same year, I needed a graphing calculator for my advanced math class. "Can't you just borrow one?" Mom had asked, looking pained at the $120 price tag. I ended up babysitting for 3 weekends to buy it myself. The pattern continued throughout our childhood. Brandon's room was renovated with custom shelving for his trophies when he was 12. My request for a desk to replace the wobbly card table I use for studying was postponed repeatedly until Grandma Eleanor bought me one for Christmas. Speaking of Christmas, those mornings told the story better than anything. I'd watch Brandon unwrap the latest gaming system, expensive sneakers, sports equipment, and designer clothes. My pile was always smaller, practical items like socks, school supplies, and occasionally a book I'd been wanting. One Christmas when I was 14, I received a total of 3 gifts while Brandon got 11. I counted. Birthdays were no different. Brandon's celebrations were elaborate affairs with dozens of friends, custom cakes, and entertainment. My 16th birthday dinner was forgotten because Brandon had a regional baseball game the same day. We celebrated a week later with a grocery store cake and a gift card. Despite everything, I excelled academically. Without parental cheerleading, I developed a fierce internal motivation. I joined debate team, student government, and math club, often finding my own rides home since my parents were busy with Brandon's sports schedule. Every report card with straight A's, every academic award, every student leadership position, I kept hoping these achievements would eventually earn me equal standing in my parents' eyes. "We just expect this from you, Amanda," my mother would say when I showed her another perfect report card. "You've always been the responsible one." What she meant was, your achievements don't require our attention. My grandmother Eleanor was the only one who seemed to see me clearly. "You're extraordinary, Amanda," she'd tell me during our Sunday afternoon visits. And someday you'll find people who recognize that. I clung to those words on my darkest days, when the invisibility at home felt suffocating. By high school, I developed a self-reliance that both served and hindered me. I never asked for help, never complained, never showed weakness. I figured out college applications on my own, researched scholarships, and planned campus visits around my work schedule at the local grocery store. When my acceptance letter from Cornell University arrived, I rushed home, letter clutched in my hand, heart pounding with excitement. Mom was in the kitchen preparing Brandon's favorite meal for his baseball team dinner. "I got in," I announced, holding up the letter. "Full academic scholarship to Cornell." "That's nice, honey," Mom said, glancing up briefly. "Can you set the table for Brandon's team dinner? They'll be here in 20 minutes. Dad's reaction wasn't much better. "Cornell's expensive, even with a scholarship. You sure you want to take that on?" 2 months later, When Brandon received a partial baseball scholarship to the state university, my parents threw a party with 50 guests. They commissioned a custom banner, ordered catering, and Dad gave a tearful speech about how proud he was. I stood in the corner sipping punch, wondering if I was crazy for noticing the difference in their reactions. They don't define your worth, Grandma Eleanor whispered, appearing beside me as if she could read my thoughts. Remember that, Amanda. They don't define your worth. Cornell was simultaneously the most challenging and liberating experience of my life. For the first time, I was judged solely on my own merits, not in relation to my brother. Professors noticed my contributions, peers sought my opinions, and gradually I began to understand what it felt like to be valued. My scholarship covered tuition, but nothing else. To pay for books, housing, and meals, I worked 3 jobs. My day typically started at 5:30 a.m. at a local coffee shop, where I worked until my first class. Between classes, I shelved books at the university library. And weekends were dedicated to a retail position at a clothing store in the mall. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. Most nights, I collapsed into bed around midnight after finishing assignments, only to rise before dawn the next day. The physical toll was evident: perpetual dark circles, weight loss, and a constant low-grade illness that never quite went away. But I was determined to make it work. Meanwhile, back home, Brandon was living the college dream I couldn't have. My parents paid for his apartment, meal plan, car insurance, and gave him a generous monthly allowance. When I called home during my first semester, conversations inevitably revolved around Brandon's social life and sports achievements. Have you made any friends? Mom would eventually ask, almost as an afterthought. Yes, I'd say. Not mentioning that my friends were mostly the other exhausted students I nodded to during pre-dawn shifts at the coffee shop. Midway through his sophomore year, Brandon lost his scholarship due to poor academic performance. Rather than expressing disappointment, my parents rallied around him. College isn't for everyone, Dad said during our monthly family call. Brandon just needs to find his path. That path involved moving back home, where my parents converted their home office into a studio apartment for him. They continued paying his expenses while he found himself through a series of part-time jobs and abandoned hobbies. During my rare visits home, I'd find Brandon playing video games in the middle of the day, surrounded by snack wrappers and empty energy drink cans. My parents talked about his transition period, with the gravity usually reserved for discussing cancer recovery. He's really discovering who he is, Mom would say, as if taking 3 years to decide between barista training and community college classes was a noble spiritual journey. Despite my grueling schedule, I maintained a 4.0 GPA and secured a prestigious summer internship at a marketing firm in New York City. The internship led to a job offer for after graduation, with a starting salary that would finally free me from financial anxiety. When I called to share the news, Dad answered. That's great, honey, he said, his voice distracted. Hey, can I call you back? Brandon's car is making a funny noise, and we're taking it to the mechanic. I never received that call back. By junior year, I developed a small but solid support network. My roommate Rachel became the sister I'd always wanted but never had in Brandon. Her unfailing loyalty and genuine excitement for my achievements were balms to my wounded soul. My other close friend, Tiffany, introduced me to her study group, and for the first time, I experienced the joy of collaborative learning without competition. It was also during junior year that I met Michael in my advanced marketing class. Thoughtful and perceptive, he noticed things about me that I thought I'd hidden successfully. Why do you flinch when people compliment you? He asked during our third date. The question unlocked something in me, and I found myself telling him about my family, something I rarely discussed. Instead of dismissing my feelings or suggesting I was exaggerating responses I'd received from previous boyfriends, Michael listened intently. That sounds really painful, he said simply when I finished. And extremely unfair. His validation was like cool water on a burn I'd been ignoring for years. As graduation approached, my resentment toward my family grew alongside my excitement for the future. Part of me still hoped that completing my degree with honors, securing an excellent job, and achieving financial independence would finally earn me the recognition I've been seeking my entire life. Another part, the part that was healing through therapy sessions at the University Counseling Center and through honest conversations with Michael and my friends, was beginning to accept that this recognition might never come. Brandon, meanwhile, had finally re-enrolled in college after 3 years of finding himself. My parents celebrated this decision as if he'd discovered the cure for cancer. They paid his tuition in full, bought him new furniture for his apartment, and spoke endlessly about his maturity and perseverance. I tried not to compare our situations, but the contrast was stark. While Brandon received praise and financial support for doing what most people do as a matter of course, I had worked myself to the point of physical illness to achieve exceptional results. Largely unnoticed by my family. You don't need their approval anymore, Michael reminded me after a particularly difficult phone call with my parents. You've proven yourself 1,000 times over. I knew he was right, but some stubborn part of me still craved the parental recognition I'd never received. Some childish corner of my heart still believed that if I just achieved enough, sacrificed enough, succeeded enough, my parents would finally see me. It was a hope I couldn't quite extinguish, despite all evidence suggesting it was futile. My graduation from Cornell was a picture-perfect spring day, azure sky, gentle breeze, and the intoxicating sense of accomplishment that hung in the air around the thousands of graduates and their families. My parents and Brandon arrived an hour before the ceremony. Just as I was lining up with my fellow graduates, there were hurried hugs and awkward small talk before they headed to find seats. No flowers, no cards, no camera to capture the moment, just their physical presence, which I tried to convince myself was enough. The ceremony itself was a blur of speeches and tradition, culminating in that magical moment when we moved our tassels from right to left, officially transforming from students to graduates. As I crossed the stage, I heard Rachel's family cheering wildly. They'd made signs and were standing on their chairs, waving madly. My own family offered polite applause. Afterward, while other families took dozens of photos and presented their graduates with gifts and flowers, my parents suggested we find a restaurant for an early dinner so they could begin the 5-hour drive home before dark. During dinner, my father asked about my job plans, nodding absently as I explained my position at the marketing firm. My mother inquired about my apartment search, frowning when I mentioned Manhattan rent prices. Wouldn't it be smarter to live somewhere cheaper and commute? She suggested, as if I hadn't researched every possible option before making my decision. The conversation quickly turned to Brandon's recent academic revival. Brandon got all B's this semester, Mom announced proudly. The advisor says if he keeps this up, he'll graduate next spring. That's great, I said, genuinely happy for my brother despite everything. Brandon had struggled with undiagnosed ADHD, something our parents had finally addressed during his time off. With proper support, he was doing much better academically. We're so proud of how he's turned things around, Dad added, clapping Brandon on the shoulder. I waited for them to add that they were proud of me too for graduating with highest honors, for securing a job at a top firm, for doing it all without their financial support. The words never came. As dessert arrived, my father cleared his throat and raised his water glass. I'd like to make an announcement, he said. Brandon, your mother and I have been discussing what to do for your graduation next year, and we've decided not to wait. He pulled out his phone and showed Brandon a photo of a brand new SUV with a giant red bow on the hood. It's a 2023 Ford Explorer, Dad said, beaming. Fully loaded. It's parked at home in the garage. Your old car can go to the junkyard where it belongs. Brandon's eyes widened. Are you serious? That's like a $35,000 car. You deserve it. Mom said, squeezing his hand. We're so proud of how far you've come. I sat frozen, fork suspended halfway to my mouth, a strange ringing in my ears. I wasn't materially envious. I didn't need or want an expensive car. It was the blatant disparity in how our achievements were recognized that struck me like a physical blow. And Amanda, my father continued, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out an envelope. This is for you. For one wild moment, hope flared in my chest. Perhaps they'd saved something special for me after all, a heartfelt card, a modest but meaningful gift, some acknowledgement of my accomplishments. I opened the envelope and pulled out a sheet of paper. It was an itemized bill, meticulously broken down into categories. Asterisk room and board during breaks. 8 weeks total $2. 400 asterisk. Utilities during stays. $3.50. Food consumed. $6.40. Wear and tear on household items. $2.10. Total due. $3,600. What is this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Well, we were calculating what Brandon's room and board has cost us these past few years. Dad explained casually. And we realized we should account for the times you stayed with us during your breaks too. We're not charging you for your childhood years, of course, he added, as if that were a generous concession. You're billing me for staying in my own home during Christmas and summer breaks? I asked, still unable to process what was happening. It's only fair, Mom chimed in. You've been working for years and now you have this fancy job. Brandon's still getting established. I worked because I had to pay for college, I said slowly. While you paid for Brandon's apartment even when he wasn't in school. That was different, Dad said, his tone hardening. Brandon needed support during his transition period. And I didn't? I could feel tears threatening, but I refused to let them fall. I worked 3 jobs and maintained a 4.0 GPA. I graduated with honors today. You're making too big a deal of this, Mom sighed. It's just to help offset what we're doing for Brandon. Family helps family. Except when that family member's me, I said quietly. Brandon shifted uncomfortably in his seat but said nothing. Not in my defense, not in theirs. Just silence. I looked around the table at my family, at the parents who had never seen me clearly, at the brother who had benefited from their favoritism without ever acknowledging it. In that moment, something calcified in my chest. A protective shell around my heart that had been forming for years finally hardened completely. I need some air, I said. Placing my napkin on the table and standing abruptly, I walked out of the restaurant without looking back, the bill clutched in my trembling hand. The moment I reached my car, the tears I'd been holding back flooded out in great gasping sobs that shook my entire body. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, trying to anchor myself as wave after wave of hurt washed over me. It wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about the message the bill conveyed more clearly than words ever could. You don't matter as much. You never have. After 20 minutes of crying, I called Rachel. They gave Brandon a $35,000 car, I said when she answered, my voice breaking. And they gave me a bill for staying in my childhood bedroom during breaks. Rachel's outrage was immediate and validating. They did what? On your graduation day? Are you serious? As I recounted the details, Rachel's fury helped transform my hurt into something more manageable, a simmering anger that felt healthier than the crushing despair of moments before. Amanda, this isn't normal. She said firmly. This is beyond favoritism. This is emotional abuse. Maybe I'm overreacting, I said, falling back on the doubt my parents had instilled in me whenever I questioned their treatment. You're not, Rachel insisted. Think about it. Would you ever treat someone you love this way? Would you bill your future child for staying in their home during college breaks? While buying their sibling a luxury vehicle? Put that way, the answer was obvious. I would never. The conversation with Rachel triggered memories of other incidents I'd normalized over the years. The time my parents forgot to pick me up from the airport when I came home for Thanksgiving, leaving me waiting for 3 hours because Brandon had a scrimmage game. The Christmas they gave Brandon a new laptop while giving me bath products from the mall kiosk. The countless achievements that went unacknowledged while Brandon's mediocrity was celebrated. When I hung up with Rachel, I sat in my car watching families celebrating their graduates with flowers, balloons, and genuine pride. Parents hugging their children, taking photos, beaming with unconditional love. The contrast to my own experience was stark and painful. I drove back to my campus apartment in a daze, my mind racing. What should I do now? Confront my parents? Try once more to explain how their treatment affected me? Or accept that nothing would ever change? The next morning, I called the University Counseling Center and was able to get an emergency appointment with Dr. Martinez, the therapist I'd been seeing sporadically throughout my senior year. What you're describing is a common dynamic in families with narcissistic parents, Dr. Martinez explained after I recounted the graduation dinner disaster. The golden child versus the scapegoat. So I'm the scapegoat, I said flatly. It appears that way, she agreed. And unfortunately, these dynamics rarely change without the parents acknowledging the problem and committing to therapy themselves. Which my parents would never do, I said. They don't think there's a problem. Dr. Martinez nodded sympathetically. In cases like this, setting clear boundaries becomes essential for your mental health. What those boundaries look like is up to you, whether it's limiting contact, having direct conversations about specific behaviors, or in some cases, taking a break from the relationship altogether. For the next week, I thought about little else. I ignored my parents' texts asking why I'd left dinner so abruptly. I dodged Brandon's half-hearted attempts to play mediator. Instead, I focused on what I truly wanted. Did I want to confront my parents one more time? The thought was exhausting. I tried explaining my feelings to them countless times over the years, only to be told I was too sensitive, too jealous, too demanding. Nothing had changed. The more I reflected, the clearer it became. I needed a clean break. Not forever, perhaps, but for long enough to build my new life without their constant undermining. Long enough to discover who I was outside of their shadow. The decision brought immediate relief. Like setting down a heavy backpack I'd been carrying for years. But it also brought practical considerations. How would I separate myself from my family without causing a dramatic confrontation? I decided to write a letter, one that explained my feelings without being accusatory, that set my boundaries without inviting debate. I spent days drafting and redrafting, finding the balance between honesty and kindness. Simultaneously, I began practical preparations. I changed my mailing address for all important documents. I created a new email account for professional correspondence. I made lists of what remaining possessions I needed to retrieve from my parents' home. Through it all, Michael was my rock. "Whatever you decide, I'm here," he promised, holding me when the grief hit in unexpected waves. Because there was grief even amidst the liberation. I was mourning the family I'd always wanted but never had. Mourning the parental love and recognition I'd spent 26 years chasing, only to finally accept it wasn't available to me. 2 weeks after graduation, I called my grandmother Eleanor. Our relationship had always existed somewhat separate from the family dynamic, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing her along with my parents. "I'm not surprised," she said after I explained my decision. "I've watched them dim your light for years, Amanda." It broke my heart. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, not accusingly but genuinely curious. "I did many times," she sighed. "Your father accused me of playing favorites. Your mother said I was undermining their parenting. Eventually, I realized I could better help you by being a safe harbor rather than causing more family conflict. I don't want to lose you," I admitted, my voice small. "You won't," she promised. "My relationship with you is separate from my relationship with them. That won't change." Her support solidified my resolve. With my letter finished and my plan in place, I was ready to take the final step. I chose a Tuesday morning to collect my remaining belongings, knowing both my parents would be at work and Brandon would be at school. Using the spare key I still had, I entered my childhood home one last time. The house was quiet, sunlight streaming through the windows and illuminating dust motes in the air. I stood in the entryway for a moment, letting memories wash over me, some happy, many painful. All part of what had shaped me. Upstairs, my childhood bedroom was largely unchanged, though it had clearly become a storage space over the years. Boxes of Christmas decorations lined one wall. My father's old golf clubs leaned in the corner. It was fitting somehow that even my room wasn't really mine anymore. I began carefully packing the few belongings I still wanted: photo albums, a stuffed elephant I'd had since birth, my high school yearbooks, and a small jewelry box containing my grandmother's pearls. As I sorted through drawers, I found items I'd forgotten, poems I'd written in middle school, awards from academic competitions, dried corsages from school dances. In my closet, I discovered a shoebox filled with birthday cards from my grandmother and a few friends, each one containing a message that had meant something to me. At the bottom of the box was a watercolor painting I'd done in 3rd grade that had won a district-wide contest. My art teacher had raved about my talent, but my parents had skipped the award ceremony because of Brandon's baseball practice. Each item triggered memories, some making me smile, others bringing a fresh wave of hurt. But beneath the emotions was a strange, growing sense of peace. These objects and memories were part of me, but they didn't define my future. After filling 2 suitcases with the items I wanted to keep, I placed my letter on my mother's pillow where I knew she would find it. The envelope simply said, "Mom and Dad," in my neat handwriting. Inside, I had written, "Dear Mom and Dad, *, by the time you read this, I will have taken my remaining belongings and begun the next chapter of my life. After considerable thought, I've decided that I need space from our relationship, *. For as long as I can remember, I have tried to earn your love and recognition through achievement, responsibility, and independence. Despite my efforts, I have consistently felt less valued than Brandon. The events at my graduation dinner simply confirmed what I felt for years, that no matter what I achieve, It will never be enough to be treated as an equal in our family asterisk. Asterisk, I'm not writing this to hurt you or to receive apologies. I'm writing to explain why I need to step away. I need time to build a life where my worth isn't constantly questioned, where my achievements are celebrated, and where love doesn't feel conditional. Asterisk. Asterisk, I don't know how long this separation will last. It might be months, it might be years. What I do know is that I cannot continue in a relationship that causes me so much pain. Asterisk. Asterisk, I am changing my phone number and email address. Grandma Eleanor will always know how to reach me in case of emergency. Asterisk. Asterisk, I wish you both well. Despite everything, I love you and always will. Asterisk. Amanda. I read the letter one last time, folded it carefully, and placed it in the envelope. It said everything I needed to say without blame or bitterness. It was honest but not cruel. As I prepared to leave, I noticed a family photo on the hallway wall, the four of us at the beach when I was about 14 and Brandon 11. We were all smiling, looking like a perfectly happy family. I remembered that day clearly, minutes after this photo was taken. My parents had spent the rest of the afternoon watching Brandon boogie board while I sat alone reading under an umbrella. The photo captured a moment of unity that hadn't actually existed. I looked at it for a long moment, then turned away, carrying my suitcases downstairs and out to my car. I didn't look back as I drove away. That afternoon, I changed my phone number and blocked my parents and Brandon on all social media. I set up email filters to automatically archive any messages from their addresses. Then I finished packing for my move to New York, scheduled for the following week. The first call came that evening, my mother likely having found the letter after returning from work. I let it go to my new voicemail, which hadn't yet been set up. 6 more calls followed in rapid succession. By the next morning, I had 17 missed calls from my parents' numbers and 3 from Brandon. I deleted the notifications without listening to the voicemails. Whatever they had to say, I wasn't ready to hear it. Michael and Rachel helped me move into my new apartment in New York the following Saturday. It was a tiny studio in Washington Heights, all I could afford even with my decent starting salary, but it was mine. We spent the day assembling IKEA furniture, hanging curtains, and transforming the space into a home. To new beginnings, Rachel toasted that evening, raising a plastic cup of cheap champagne. To creating your own family, Michael added, his eyes warm with understanding. My grandmother called the next day to report that my parents were beside themselves, alternating between worry, anger, and disbelief. Your mother keeps saying she doesn't understand what happened, Eleanor said. Your father is calling you ungrateful. Are they even acknowledging the bill they gave me at graduation? I asked. They're saying you misunderstood, Eleanor replied gently. That it was just a joke taken wrong. A joke. Somehow that was worse than if they'd meant it seriously. And Brandon? I couldn't help asking. Confused but mostly staying out of it, she said. Though he's enjoying his new car. The information stung, but less sharply than it would have just weeks earlier. Distance, both physical and emotional, was already providing perspective. My first few weeks at my new job were exhilarating and exhausting. I threw myself into the work, grateful for the distraction. Colleagues became friends, projects demanded my full attention, and gradually, thoughts of my family receded from constant preoccupation to occasional pangs. That's not to say there weren't difficult moments. When a coworker casually mentioned Sunday dinner with her parents, I felt a hollowness in my chest. When another team member's family sent congratulatory flowers for a successful campaign, I excused myself to the bathroom where I cried silently in a stall. The first holiday season was particularly challenging. Thanksgiving arrived with a flurry of social media posts about family reunions and gratitude. I declined invitations to join friends' family gatherings, not yet ready to witness functional family dynamics up close. Instead, Michael and I created our own tradition, volunteering at a homeless shelter in the morning and preparing an elaborate dinner for just the 2 of us in the evening. It wasn't the Norman Rockwell painting of Thanksgiving, but it was meaningful in its own way. Christmas brought similar challenges. My grandmother sent a care package of homemade cookies and a few carefully chosen gifts. She also reported that my parents had put gifts for me under their tree just in case. The gesture might have weakened my resolve a few months earlier. Now, it only highlighted how they still didn't understand. They were waiting for me to get over it, rather than acknowledging the years of hurt that had led to my decision. In the months that followed, I developed anxiety symptoms that eventually sent me back to therapy. Dr. Martinez helped me recognize that my body was processing years of emotional stress now that I was finally safe enough to feel it. Think of it like a soldier returning from war, she explained. Often they don't experience PTSD until they're home and secure. Your nervous system is finally processing what it couldn't while you were still in survival mode. Gradually, with therapy and the unwavering support of Michael, Rachel, and my small but solid friend group, I began to heal. The anxiety attacks became less frequent. The grief came in smaller waves rather than overwhelming tsunamis. I began to discover who Amanda Wilson was when she wasn't desperately trying to prove her worth. 6 months passed without contact from my family, apart from updates through my grandmother. I learned that my parents had transitioned from worried to anger to a strange revisionist history where I had always been difficult and too sensitive. They're telling people you had some kind of breakdown after graduation, Eleanor reported during one of our weekly phone calls, that you're going through a phase. Their inability to reflect on their role in my decision was disappointing but not surprising. It was easier to paint me as unstable than to examine decades of favoritism. My life in New York developed its own rhythm. I received my first promotion at work, began taking pottery classes on weekends, and started building friendships beyond Rachel and Michael. I was creating the life I wanted, step by careful step. Then on an ordinary Tuesday in November, Brandon appeared at my office building. I was returning from lunch when I spotted him in the lobby. Shifting awkwardly from foot to foot, looking out of place in his casual clothes amidst the business suits rushing past. My first instinct was to turn around and leave. My second was curiosity. What was so important that he'd tracked down my workplace? Brandon, I said, approaching him cautiously. What are you doing here? He startled, then gave me an uncertain smile. Hey sis. I was in the city for a job interview and thought I'd try to see you. How did you find my office? I asked, still maintaining a careful distance. Grandma, he admitted. She didn't want to give me your address, but she thought meeting on neutral ground might be okay. I sighed. I have a meeting in 20 minutes, but we can talk in the coffee shop next door until then. The conversation was strained at first. Brandon commented on the city, asked about my job, told me about finishing his degree. I answered politely but briefly, waiting for him to reveal the real reason for his visit. Finally, he set down his coffee cup and met my eyes directly. Mom and Dad are pretty messed up about your letter, he said. They talk about it all the time. Are they messed up about what led to the letter? I asked. Or just that I set a boundary? Brandon looked uncomfortable. They don't really see it the way you do, he admitted. Dad says you've always been jealous of me. And Mom thinks you're being ungrateful for everything they did for you. Like charging me rent for my childhood bedroom? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. They say that was just a joke that you took wrong. Brandon fidgeted with his napkin. That you've always been too serious. It was exactly what my grandmother had reported. But hearing it directly still hurt. It wasn't a joke, I said quietly. And even if it was intended as one. What kind of parents joke like that on their daughter's graduation day while giving their son a luxury vehicle? Brandon had no answer for that. Why are you here, Brandon? I asked finally. Did they send you to bring me back to the fold? No, he said, surprising me. They don't actually know I'm here. I came because I've been thinking a lot about what you said in your letter. About feeling less valued. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I never saw it when we were growing up, he continued. It was just normal to me that I got more attention, more stuff. But after you left, I started noticing things. Like how they have this whole narrative about you being difficult and ungrateful that doesn't match the sister I know. Or how they take credit for your success but none of the responsibility for the fact that you felt you had to leave. I stared at him, genuinely shocked by this level of awareness. I'm not saying I fully understand, he added quickly. But I'm trying to. And I wanted you to know that I miss you. That regardless of what happens with Mom and Dad, I'd like to have some kind of relationship with my sister. It was more insight than I'd ever expected from Brandon. Part of me wanted to hug him. Another part remained wary. I appreciate that, I said carefully. But I need to know that you understand why I left. That it wasn't one incident or me being too sensitive. It was a lifetime of feeling like I didn't matter as much. I think I'm starting to get it, he said. And I'm sorry I never stood up for you. His apology, simple but seemingly genuine, loosened something in my chest. I can't jump back into family dynamics, I told him. I'm still healing. But maybe we could get coffee again sometime. Just us. Brandon's face brightened. I'd like that. When he left, I felt oddly lighter. Not ready to reconnect with my parents, but perhaps open to rebuilding a relationship with my brother on new, healthier terms. That possibility was tested a month later when my grandmother was hospitalized with pneumonia. I took immediate leave from work and flew home. My heart racing with worry for the one family member who had always seen and valued me. The hospital reunion was as awkward as I'd feared. My parents were already there when I arrived. Their faces showing a complex mix of emotions when they saw me: relief, anger, hurt, hope. Amanda, my mother said, rising from her chair beside Grandma's bed. You came. For Grandma. I clarified gently but firmly. How is she? The doctors were cautiously optimistic, though concerned about her age and some underlying health issues. We established an unspoken rotation, each taking turns sitting with her while avoiding being alone together. On the second day, my father cornered me in the hospital cafeteria. This has gone on long enough, Amanda, he said without preamble. Your mother cries herself to sleep. Is that what you wanted? I took a deep breath, centering myself. I didn't leave to punish you or Mom, I said evenly. I left to take care of myself. By cutting off your family, he demanded. While your grandmother is ill? I didn't cut off Grandma, I pointed out. We talk weekly. And I'm here now. Because you had to be, he retorted. What kind of daughter abandons her parents without even discussing the problem first? I almost laughed at the absurdity. Dad, I tried discussing the problem for years. You and Mom always dismissed my feelings. You're doing it right now, making this about your pain rather than considering why I felt I had to leave. We gave you everything, he insisted, his voice rising. Paid for your education, supported your goals. This time I did laugh, though there was no humor in it. You didn't pay for my education. I worked 3 jobs and took out loans that I'm still paying off. Brandon is the one who got his education paid for, even after he dropped out the first time. My father's face reddened. There you go again, always comparing yourself to your brother. It's not healthy, Amanda. I realized then that he genuinely couldn't see it. The favoritism was so normalized in his mind that he interpreted my accurate observations as pathological jealousy. I need to get back to Grandma, I said, standing to leave. I didn't come here to rehash this. I came for her. As I walked away, he called after me, family should come first, Amanda. Always. I turned back briefly. I agree, I said quietly. That's the problem. My grandmother recovered slowly but steadily. During my week at the hospital, Michael called daily, providing emotional support from a distance. Our relationship had deepened over the months, his steady presence a healing counterpoint to my family's chaos. How are you holding up? He asked each evening. Better than I expected. I answered truthfully. Being around them hurts less than it used to. It was true. Their comments and attitudes that once would have devastated me now bounced off the protective shell I built. I could see their behavior clearly for what it was, not a reflection of my worth, but of their own limitations. When I returned to New York, I brought with me both relief and a strange new confidence. I had faced my family and maintained my boundaries. I had weathered their attempts to pull me back into old patterns. I had emerged intact. In the months that followed, Brandon and I established a cautious new relationship. We met for coffee when he visited the city, exchanged occasional texts, and slowly built something that, while not close, was at least honest. My parents continued to reach out sporadically, birthday cards with no mention of our estrangement, holiday invitations as if nothing had happened. Occasional voicemails on my new number, which they'd obtained from Brandon, asking when I was coming home. I responded to none of it, maintaining the boundary I'd established. It wasn't about punishment, it was about protection. I wasn't ready to reopen that door. Not when they showed no understanding of why I'd closed it in the first place. Meanwhile, my relationship with Michael deepened. He proposed on a snowy evening in Central Park, with a simple solitaire ring and a promise to always see me clearly. I said yes without hesitation. A year and a half after I left my parents' home for the last time, my phone lit up with Brandon's name. We'd maintained our fragile reconnection through occasional coffee meetings and text exchanges, but rarely spoke by phone. I found something I think you should know about, he said when I answered. his voice uncharacteristically serious. What is it? I asked, immediately concerned. I was cleaning out the attic at Mom and Dad's and I found a box of your old diaries, he explained. From when you were like 10 through high school. My stomach tightened. I'd forgotten about those journals, abandoned when I left for college. I didn't mean to read them. Brandon continued awkwardly. But one fell open and I saw my name and then I just kept reading. I said nothing, waiting. Amanda, I had no idea. His voice cracked slightly. The way you described feeling invisible, how hard you tried to get their attention, how much it hurt when they missed your events for my games. It was all there in black and white. From when you were just a kid. I closed my eyes, memories flooding back of writing those entries by flashlight, pouring my confusion and pain onto those pages when I had nowhere else to express it. I knew things were unbalanced, Brandon continued. But reading your words from back then, before you had the vocabulary to really explain it, it hit me hard. You weren't exaggerating or being too sensitive. If anything, you were understating how bad it was. His recognition, coming so long after the fact, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I've been seeing a therapist, he added, surprising me further, trying to understand the whole golden child thing and how it affected both of us. Because it did mess me up too, just differently. How so? I asked, genuinely curious. I never developed real resilience, he explained. I expected things to come easily, for people to make allowances for me. When I hit real challenges, I fell apart because I'd never had to work for anything. Plus, there was always this pressure to be perfect to justify their favoritism, you know? It was a perspective I'd never considered, that being the favorite carried its own damaging pressures. Anyway, Brandon said, I wanted to tell you I'm sorry. Not just vaguely sorry like before, but specifically sorry for not seeing what was happening, for benefiting from their favoritism, for not standing up for you. You deserved better from all of us. His apology, detailed and sincere, was something I hadn't known I needed until I heard it. Thank you, I said softly. That means a lot. I know you're engaged now, he continued. Michael seems like a great guy. And I understand if you don't want any of us at your wedding. But I hope maybe we could keep building our relationship, whatever that looks like. I found myself smiling. I'd like that, Brandon. 2 weeks later, we met for coffee in a quiet cafe near my apartment. The conversation flowed more easily than ever before, with a new honesty between us. Brandon shared insights from his therapy, and I found myself able to discuss my childhood without the usual sting. Have Mom and Dad read the diaries? I asked eventually. Brandon shook his head. I tried to get them to, but they refused. Dad said it would just be teenage dramatics and Mom said it would be invading your privacy, though that didn't stop them from reading your letter to them multiple times. I wasn't surprised. Denial was their most consistent parenting strategy. They're still hoping you'll come to Sunday dinner someday like nothing happened, he added. They talk about it like you're just going through a phase. And what do you think? I asked. I think they'll never fully get it, he said honestly. Their worldview doesn't allow them to see how they hurt you. It would require them to question everything about themselves as parents. His insight impressed me. The brother I'd grown up with had never been this perceptive. So where does that leave us? I wondered aloud. Mom and Dad and me? Brandon considered the question carefully. Maybe it's not about them getting it completely. Maybe it's about finding a new way to interact that protects you from further hurt. Limited contact, clear boundaries, managed expectations. It was essentially what my therapist had suggested months earlier, but hearing it from Brandon gave it new weight. Over the following months, I cautiously tested those waters. I sent my parents brief, factual emails updating them on major life events. I allowed a short phone call on my birthday. I agreed to meet them in public places for brief, structured interactions. Each time, I maintained firm boundaries about what I would and wouldn't discuss. Each time, I left with mixed feelings, gratitude for the small steps toward a new relationship, frustration at their continued inability to fully acknowledge the past. When Michael and I began planning our wedding, the question of my family's involvement became unavoidable. After much discussion with both Michael and my therapist, I decided to invite my parents and Brandon, with clear expectations set in advance. I'd like you to be there, I told my parents during a carefully orchestrated lunch meeting. But I need you to understand that this doesn't mean everything is resolved between us. It means I'm willing to include you in this important day while maintaining the boundaries I've established. My father started to argue, but my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. "We understand," she said, though I wasn't convinced she did. "We're just happy to be included." The wedding planning brought one final confrontation. 2 months before the ceremony, my father called, irate about the fact that Michael's father would be walking me down the aisle instead of him. "I'm your father," he insisted. "It's my right. It's my choice." I corrected him gently. "And I've chosen someone who has consistently supported and valued me. So this is punishment," he said bitterly. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "This is consequence. This is the natural result of our relationship history. You can accept my decision and attend the wedding, or you can reject it and stay home. But you can't change it." It was the clearest I'd ever been with him, without anger or blame, simply stating truth. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "Fine," he said finally. "Your mother would never forgive me if I missed it." It wasn't acceptance, not really. But it was acquiescence, and that was enough. My wedding day arrived crisp and clear. A perfect October Saturday. As Michael's father walked me down the aisle, I caught sight of my parents in the third row. My mother was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. My father sat stiffly beside her, his expression unreadable. In the second row, Brandon gave me an encouraging smile and a subtle thumbs up. Beside him sat Rachel and my other close friends, the family I had chosen for myself. At the reception, my parents maintained polite distance, interacting with me only briefly during the expected moments. It wasn't the joyful family reconciliation Hollywood might have scripted, but it was a workable reality we had all accepted. The journey from that devastating graduation dinner to my wedding day had been long and often painful. The little girl who had desperately sought her parents' approval had grown into a woman who no longer needed it to know her own worth. The healing wasn't perfect or complete. There were still moments of sadness for what might have been. Still occasional dreams where my parents suddenly understood and apologized for everything. But those moments no longer defined me. What had started with a bill and a hastily scribbled note had evolved into a profound life lesson about self-worth, boundaries, and the family we choose versus the family we're born into. I'd learned that walking away isn't always giving up. Sometimes it's the bravest form of self-preservation. I'd discovered that healing doesn't mean forgetting or even necessarily forgiving in the traditional sense. Sometimes it means accepting what cannot be changed and building something new from the pieces. Most importantly, I'd learned that the approval I'd spent my childhood chasing had never been the real prize. The real treasure was finding my own voice, setting my own standards, and surrounding myself with people who valued me not for what I achieved, but simply for who I was. As Michael and I shared our first dance as a married couple, I caught sight of my grandmother Eleanor watching from her table, her eyes bright with pride and love. She raised her champagne glass slightly in a private toast between us. I smiled back, filled with gratitude for her unwavering support throughout my journey. Because of her, I'd always known there was at least one person who saw me clearly, and that knowledge had been the seed from which my self-worth had eventually grown. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear. My relationship with my parents would likely always be complicated, a careful dance of limited contact and managed expectations. But I was no longer defined by their perception of me, no longer measuring my worth through their eyes. I had written a new story for myself, one where I was the heroine of my own life, not a supporting character in someone else's. Have you ever had to walk away from a relationship that was hurting you, even when it broke your heart to do so? Or have you experienced that moment of clarity when you realized your worth wasn't dependent on someone else's validation? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life journeys of healing and self-discovery. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to love yourself enough to leave. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to write your own story, whatever that looks like for you.